Hello, friends. What's going on? Anyone have any news they want to share? Events they want to promote? Jokes they want to give? Rena, you're feeling better.
I do. At least I look not so ugly anymore.
No comment. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. Mm, thanks for everyone that's been debating online. They're fun to read. We will have more debates today. How'd it go with Ben? Thumbs up. After class, everyone was like, you should invite Ben more often. You should have people come into your class more often. Just try not to be offended. I should ask the translators how it went with Ben. Eka, how do you do? Really? Oh, that's good. That's either good or a lie. I'm not sure. Okay, let's begin. Um, we are on class 7. We have about half as many participants, so that's about on schedule. Good job, people that are here, sticking it out, getting through the course. I was reviewing the class, and it was kind of cool. Geshe Michael was talking about the importance of going to class, like to have teachings live. And he said you can get some information from, a recording or a book, um, and that's okay. That's good. But see, remember, this is ACI 16, and he had taught all the ACI classes. And then he was doing these 3 review classes. And then he was going into 3-year retreat. And it was this really kind of scary moment for a lot of students. They had been, the beginning, the classes were very small. And, at this point in class 16, there's 150 people. There's a lot of enthusiasm. Michael has a bunch of projects, or not a bunch, a few. And no one knew what 3-year retreat was about. No one had ever really done it in our group. And everyone was kind of scared everything would collapse. the projects would collapse, ACI would collapse. And so part of these courses, he was having some of his more experienced teachers teach and getting us used to the idea that um, it's not just him, it's us. That if we've made it to ACI 16, uh, we need to, the next step is teaching and continuing the lineage. And that lineage needs live teachers. We can't just listen to recordings, can't just watch videos. So if you go back and were to listen to the original recordings, at the end of each class, he's kind of giving a vision for ACI. And he's talking about the future of ACI. And a lot of it is encouraging students to see themselves as teachers and encouraging students to see their fellow students as teachers, which is even harder, perhaps. So he's talking about why it's important to go to teachers and to take the teachings live, and that there's something different in that transmission than we would get from just a recording. So if you had to miss a class, then, go find somebody to get the lineage from, get the download from. Or if you had to miss 20 minutes of class, then go find a friend, take them out for tea, try to have a nice vision of them as a teacher, and then have them teach you the part that you missed. And, I think it's kind of nice to then see them as the teacher and then to ask them the hard questions, you know, make them not just repeat the information like a robot or a tape recorder, MP3 player, reel to reel, 8-track. It's not, we're not just like robots repeating information. And he talks a lot about that. Geshe Michael talked a lot about that. We talked about, Ben talked about the 5 great books, the 5 subjects. And he's like, that's the tradition. That's the basis of what we study. And Geshe Michael, it's funny. He's like, most of those books are totally impossible to understand. They're extremely difficult to understand. And most people just won't be interested. So then we take that information and we create something that's culturally appropriate, something that people can understand. And in one sense, that was ACI. Geshe Michael's like, that's ACI. But if you do the ACI readings, they're extremely difficult. And I was talking to Ben. He just translated a text, and he owns a yoga studio, and so he has his book on the front desk where people sign in. And people are like, oh, that's your book. And he's like, yep. And he says they open it and they read it for about 30 seconds. And he's like, you can just tell they have no idea what it's saying. And they're just kind of like politely smiling and like putting it back down and like quickly like moving on to the next thing. And so he's rewriting his book into something that is understandable for common people, even yoga students, haven't studied years of philosophy. It's just extremely difficult. So we base the teachings on those five great books. ACI makes it more accessible, but then we have to, but then we have an opportunity to also integrate this wisdom into our yoga class or into, um, for me, I used to teach in high schools a lot, and it was fun. Like, how can I sneak these ideas into the high school curriculum? I have a friend that teaches first grade, and sometimes she'll show me, how she has snuck these beautiful ideas of Shanti Deva into her first grade curriculum. And so at this point in the ACI curriculum, it should be understanding the wisdom in those five great books, seeing the next step, if we're at ACI 16, is to look to um, be teaching ACI and to see ourselves as a teacher. And, if you're interested, not everyone has to do that, but it's the best way to learn. And then also how we take that wisdom and make it appropriate for the culture, appropriate for the time, and appropriate for the audience. And the lineage should be teacher to student, not MP3 recording to student, not YouTube to student. Sorry, Benji. Is Benji here? That there's a place for YouTube videos. It's how people access information. But eventually, we want to find a teacher and learn from a teacher. Benji, oh, like through mentorship. Yes, like through mentorship. A smart ass. All right, class 7. So we're moving on. Uh, class 7, we're now covering ACI 4. What's the title of ACI 4? Someone said future lives. Close. Someone said proof. We're getting there. Hey, I think this is really interesting. Uh, Karina says past and future lives. Gene and Kelly say proof of future lives. It's the proof of future lives. And then when you take the course, what does he prove? he proves past lives. So I'm really interested in why did he call it the proof of future lives? If when you study it, the proof is of past lives. So if you have an answer, please put it in the chat, because I'm curious. The course is called Proof of Future Lives. And then the proof is about past lives. And we'll study and we'll do that proof next class. But I don't know, I'm interested about it. So, and it's a fascinating thing, like this idea of, I remember hearing about this course and being like, past lives, that's crazy. Like being intrigued about that idea, but thinking it was really weird. Infinite past lives, like infinite time, infinite past lives. And in this class, Geshe Michael talks about going into the monastery in India and debating this topic, past lives, and saying that the Tibetans are terrible at it because it's the opposite. They've always just been told there's infinite past lives by their mom, by their teachers, by their culture, and no one thinks about it. It's like the opposite of what I had. Like past lives, infinite past lives. Super interesting idea. Don't believe in it. Sounds weird. But then you're curious about it, and there's a space to question it. And if you always just, that's just normal, you never do question it. And so when, so I had forgotten that Geshe Michael mentioned that, but it was the exact same story that some of my friends, when they went to study at the monastery, they said it was the only debate they ever won was when they debated the monks on past lives, because there's only one proof I've ever seen. And they just don't spend any time on it. Just take it for granted. And so, when we have something that's countercultural, it gives us an opportunity to understand it more deeply and and investigate it in a way that if we just already accepted it, we would never do. So this course I thought was so exciting. You know, the proof of future lives. What's, what does that all mean? So it's a study called pramana. Please say pramana. Pramana. Now say pramana. Pramana. Please never say pramana again. It's pramana. Okay? Pramana. It's the study of pramana. And it means the study of like valid perception, the correct perception. And it's one of the most important subjects that we can study. Jetsunkapa's main student, Gyaltsen, he said it's the kindest thing Jetsunkapa ever did for him was to teach him logic. And I think it's I can understand that from my life of studying these ideas. The study of logic has been extremely frustrating, extremely difficult, um, but also extremely beneficial to learn how bad our logic generally is constantly throughout the day, and to learn how hard having good logic is. It's extremely difficult, but it's really helped. Geshe now calls it clear thinking. I think it's a really good translation. Uh, it helps us think more clearly and to catch ourselves making assumptions about stuff. Mm, so let's start. Let's look at the first slide. Oh, I'm pretty confident we're going to have time for Q&A today. So if you have questions, pretty confident we'll get to them. We'll do that instead of a breakout room, I think. Next slide. That's the name of the course, Proof of Future Lives. Your job is to tell me why I would love to hear the theory, why it's called Proof of Future Lives. Okay. So the big overall subject is logic and perception. Mm, logic and perception is pramana. Mm, here, the picture is a great example of correct perception. Is it a young woman or an old woman? Um, so this is a very famous definition. Please say tseme, mikpe, mikpa, yupe seni. Tseme mikpa yupe seni. Tseme mikpa yupe seni. Mm, and it's the study of tsema, or valid perception. There is a thing about distinguishing correct and valid. There's a valid perception and a correct perception. That is a lower school idea. It's the same word in Tibetan, sema. And we have valid perceptions or not. And that was really confusing for me for a long time. Like, like, is this a banana in my hand? Yeah. So it's a valid perception. But I don't understand, because I think it's self-existent, it's not correct. That's not the high school's view. They don't distinguish valid and correct based on whether you see it as empty or not. It's a valid perception. We could divide that up into we're correct about the appearance, it appears as a banana, and we're incorrect about the nature of the banana. We think the banana is coming at me or is self-existent. Whereas in fact, the banana is created through a mental image. But as I understand it, the high school doesn't distinguish valid and correct. Geshe Michael talks about it a little bit in class. it's a little hard to understand because he does talk about a difference between valid and correct. And I think it's a lower school idea. And I think they might be distinguishing correct being the direct perception of emptiness. I'm not super clear on it. But for the most part, we should be thinking valid and correct, same thing. I hope I am valid and correct about that. I'm I'm pretty sure I am. It's one word, it's sema. Some schools make a distinct some schools distinguish those two. My school doesn't. So we're going to talk about sema or pramana. What does that mean? So how many valid perceptions do we have in a day? Right? If we're not saying, if valid doesn't mean seeing emptiness directly, it doesn't mean I have to stop seeing this as a self-existent thing. Yeah, Elena says 99%. Most of our perceptions are valid. So what would an invalid, a non-sema mean? There's a couple really famous scriptural ideas. One is you see a squirrel run across the road. You hit the brakes. You're driving a car. Squirrel runs across the road. You hit the brakes. And then you realize it wasn't a squirrel. It was a leaf. Second example is when we're on a boat and it starts to move, but it looks like the land is moving, not the boat. Um, Another famous example is if we're in huge state of rage or struck by a really strong negative emotion, we're not seeing things clearly. Another example. And then like being drunk or taking a bunch of LSD or something and hallucinating. Um, that is also considered examples of non-valid perceptions, wrong perceptions. And this is it. This study is called Lorik in Tibetan, Lorik, mind and mental functions. And it's a really big study in the monastery, distinguishing between what's a wrong perception, what's a valid perception, a perception that's right about the appearance, wrong about the nature. And we don't study it a ton in ACI. So it's been hard for me to, um, it's a subject that we need to go outside of ACI courses to deeply understand. But we get a start. Okay, next slide. So why are we studying this? Why study Buddhist logic? The main reason is we need to be able to understand things we can't see with our direct senses. Like we can see a banana with our eyeballs. We can hear things directly with the ears, or taste our coffee with our tongue. But how do we figure out things we can't directly see or taste or hear? And that's logic. Like seeing emptiness directly. Okay. So the purpose of logic, here's another very famous quote. The Buddha said, me or someone like me can judge somebody. And if you're not me or like me, then don't, or you will fall, meaning fall to the lower realms. And I had forgotten this story, but he demonstrates that that quote is part of a larger story of a monk who was in a monastery. And he studies really well and he gets bodhicitta. And he starts to think, I should go into the town and I should teach people about Buddhism. I should get out of the monastery, teach the people that aren't monks, that aren't nuns. I should teach them. And so, driven by this compassion, he goes and visits the town and teaches Buddhism. And this other monk gets really jealous. And he starts to spread a rumor about this monk, this teacher, and says, oh, they're going into town and they're watching movies or they're, seeing they're going on dates or they're, he just starts to say bad things about him. And that rumor gets perpetuated and people believe it. And it gets so bad that the monk has to leave. He has to leave the monastery and go to a whole different part of the country. And really, he was just out of compassion going to town to teach people. And then, out of a desire to keep the peace in the monastery, he left. He didn't argue with everybody, he didn't try to prove his point, defend himself. He just volunteers to go to keep the peace. So then the person who made these rumors up accused him of these things. They eventually die. And then, as in a lot of stories from the sutra, he's reborn as a dog for 500 times. And then he's reborn as somebody who tries to get ordained and become a monk, and it just keeps not working out. And all of these, really terrible karmic results of being jealous and saying things that weren't true of this other monk. And the Buddha is telling the story, and he's like, you know who that jealous monk is, right? Like, you know how I know this, right? He's like, because that was me. You know, I was the jealous monk. In the Vinaya stories, that's the punchline all the time is the Buddha was like, yeah, that was me. I went through 500 rebirths as a dog. I went through 500 births of losing my robes. And I'm telling you, out of compassion, like, don't do what I did, right? Don't judge somebody. Don't don't get jealous and judge people. Like, out of compassion, I'm telling you, don't judge people because I see what happened to me. So he's saying, unless you're me or someone like me, meaning a Buddha, don't judge people or you're going to be a dog. And that's challenging, right? So, does that mean we shouldn't judge somebody? Like, if we see a monk doing something bad or a person doing something bad, should we speak up and say something? Of course. And we can say, of course, but it is, it's very difficult. Every single Dharma center that tries to follow these teachings, I think, struggles with this, where we have a culture of trying to see a person as the teacher. Try to see your Lama as perfect. Try to see them as a Buddha. If you see a fault in the teacher, whose fault is that? It's not them, it's your seeds. Go fix your seeds. Don't complain about your partner. Don't complain about the teacher. Let's go fix your seeds. And there's truth to that. And we can take that too far. And we have to not allow a culture where we aren't allowed to question things. We can't have a culture where we're not allowed to question things and speak up and judge. Okay. But when we do that, we have to, reserve some space to the fact that we can't read someone's mind. They could be, we could be wrong. It's entirely possible, or there could be another perspective. But also, like the Buddha says, unless you're me or someone like me, we can't read people's minds. We can't 100% know. So as we judge and as we act, some part of our mind is, I don't know for sure. And based on the knowledge and the wisdom that I have, something's wrong. I get it. My seeds. And it's my seeds showing me something's wrong. And so I need to act, not only changing my seeds, but tangibly in the world. Even if that means saying no to our teacher. And even that, even if no one else is willing to do that in the community, and you're like the one person willing to do that in the community and say no, not okay. It's not okay for people to be treated like that or spoken to like that. mm, you know, I had to do that. I had to confront my one of my teachers about something that was I was worried I wasn't going to be allowed to do 3 retreat because I was going to confront them about something that I thought was unacceptable. And we were at a board meeting at Diamond Mountain, and I got yelled at in front of everybody by my teacher. And I knew I was doing the right thing. And I knew they knew I was doing the right thing. And it's not easy. But we have to have a situation where, you know, if we're in a situation where people aren't allowed to speak up, people aren't allowed to have a voice, and people aren't allowed to complain, that's a problem. Something's wrong. And that's not the culture that we should be creating because people get hurt. And then when we do that, we have to remember that unless you are me or someone like me, says the Buddha, just keep a part of your mind like, I'm doing the best I can. I'm acting in on the decisions in the best way I can. Next slide. Okay. A lot of people have studied the Yoga Sutra and they've studied Geshe Michael's teachings on valid perceptions. Generally, this presentation is slightly different. Usually, we talk about in the Yoga Sutra, for instance, 3 types of valid perception. That's usually how Geshe presents it. As we go through this one, it's different. So try to, and it was very confusing for me. Let's try to follow it and figure it out. Valid perceptions. What's a valid perception? I think Dan put it in earlier. Valid perception, just going through the notes. Hmm, Somebody said a fresh perception, not memory. So the definition is a valid perception is a fresh, unerring, or unmistaken state of mind. That is the lower school definition. Hope I get this right. The higher school says it's just an unmistaken state of mind. They don't include the word fresh. A valid perception is a fresh, unmistaken state of mind. That's the lower school definition of valid perception. Why do the lower schools include the word fresh, unmistaken state of mind? And to distinguish from past memories. I That's what we're usually told. I think it's deeper than that. And I'm not super clear on it, but I think it's about the lower school's view on the first moment of perception versus the second moment of perception. So, Dan, if you want to go down a rabbit hole and go deeper into this, I think it's the lower school's idea of the difference between the first moment of perception of a banana, where the object is triggering a state of mind, and the second moment of perception, which is triggered differently according to lower school in some way. It's not about remembering last week. It's about the first moment of perception and the second moment of perception, I think. Okay. An existing thing is anything perceived with a valid perception. So we're going to talk about how do we know things exist? What are the types of valid perception? Yeah, valid perception is anything that is perceived with an unmistaken state of mind. So in this class, two main kinds of valid perception: direct valid perception, deductive valid perception. Okay. Direct valid perception. For those that don't like logic, sorry, here we are in a logic text. It's okay to ask who cares. That's such a great question in philosophy. Who cares? Direct valid perception. That's how we perceive obvious reality. Banana, sound, okay, colors and shapes. So what's a type of valid perception? Just a direct perception through the eyes. I see something. Through the ears, I hear something. It's how we perceive the world around us. It's how we perceive what they call obvious reality. Okay. We can include perceiving our thoughts with the mind. Then, second category, balloons, please. Deductive perception, okay, or logic. So, logic is what we use to perceive hidden reality. So, we directly perceive a banana, right? If I take that banana and I put it behind my head so you can't see it, we need to use if I said, is there a banana still in my hand? Or if I did like, I don't know, this might be better. Salt shaker cup. We can see this salt shaker. I take it and put it behind the cup. Is there still a salt shaker in my hand? We have to use logic. We can't see it. Right. So you didn't see me throw it away. You didn't hear it drop. Right. We know things don't just disappear. So logically, we can say it's still there. And that's just as valid as seeing it directly. If our logic is airtight, that salt shaker must still exist, even though I can't see it. If our logic is solid, that's just as valid, that logical perception, just as valid as the direct sense perception. Does everybody accept that? Does anybody not accept that? So if I perceive something logically, it's just as valid as if I see it directly. Everybody good with that? Is there anybody not always, not really? Wow, this is pretty standard. Why not? Well, here's one possible answer. What if you logically perceive emptiness? Oh, sometimes logic can be incorrect. That's true, but we're talking about good logic, not incorrect logic. We're talking about perfect logic. If our logic is correct, then is that perception as valid as directly seeing something? No one says yes, good answer. But what if we logically perceive emptiness? Is that just as valid as directly perceiving emptiness? Okay, third type is authority, taking something on authority. So if somebody else was here, if Karina was here in the room, if we were all in the same room and Karina could see that the salt thing was behind the cup because she was standing behind me, you were standing in front of me, you couldn't see it. And you asked Karina, is he still holding the salt? And she said, yes. If you take Karina as a honest person, as a valid, as a person who wouldn't lie about something so stupid, then you could also have a correct perception through her words. Yes, he is still holding the salt. Okay, so three types of valid perception: direct, see it with my eyes; logic, things don't just disappear. We didn't hear it go anywhere. We didn't see him throw it. It still exists just because I can't see it. Third, authority. So those three ways of perceiving relate to three different levels of reality. Okay. The direct perception relates to obvious reality. I see something with my eyes. Logic relates to hidden reality, things that are more obscure, like the truth of emptiness. We need to logically prove emptiness. That's hidden reality. Okay. And then authority is used to determine deeply hidden reality, like the workings of karma. You can't logic out the the filth of the New York subway is created by sexual misconduct. We'll never logically figure that out. We have to trust that those scriptures are correct. Okay, so what level of reality is the banana? Or what level of reality is seeing emptiness directly? We've got a lot of votes for one for the banana. It's obvious reality. What level of reality is emptiness? Someone said hidden. Obvious, but not deceptive. And then some people are asking for who, and that's the right answer, right? And this was one of Geshe Michael's famous favorite debates that he had for his Geshe program. Is the banana obvious reality because we can perceive it with our eyes? Yeah. But what if you're blind? Then we would have to go to a different type of perception to understand if I am holding a banana, like authority or logic. Seeing emptiness direct emptiness. Is that hidden reality? It's the classical example of hidden reality that we need logic. But for a Buddha, it's not hidden. For Buddha, it's obvious reality. So we do have to ask for who. Okay. Normally we talk about three different types of perception. We've only talked about two. We talked about direct and deductive. Okay, direct is with the senses. Deductive, or maybe the better word is indirect. There's a couple different forms of indirect perceptions. Okay. One is logic. One is convention. Like if I say, it's raining cats and dogs, right? That it totally doesn't make sense, but it conveys meaning. It means it's raining a lot. There's not cats and dogs falling from the sky, but it's an expression that means it's really raining hard. Raining cats and dogs. Oh, you mean it's raining hard. It's raining a lot. So we're talking about indirect kinds of perception. There's logic, there is convention, and then there's authority. So normally in other presentations, that authority is taken out and given its own category. Okay. In this presentation, we're taking authority and putting it under indirect perceptions, kind of like, or deductive, which is very similar to logic. which is really interesting because when we say taking having a perception based on somebody else's view or somebody else's realization or perspective, that seems to be faith. It seems to be like the least logical. So why does he take authority and put it in the same category as logic? A lot of schools don't even accept authority as a valid means of knowing something. Some schools argue that logic isn't even a valid means of knowing something. So why is authority filed under logic? Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's connected to this slide. This is a very famous saying, a very famous statement. Oh, let's do the next one. Sorry. This one. I bow down to the protector, the Buddha. Those gone to bliss, meaning a Buddha. Those Buddhas have compassion. They wish to benefit all beings. And they have turned into one with completely valid perceptions. Mm, so there's a connection between having being a person who has completely become one with just valid perceptions and someone who can't lie, would never lie, because they would understand that would harm them. So my theory is that to prove somebody is a valid authority, to take somebody as a valid authority, like someone that we can have a correct perception through, we would have to prove that they wouldn't lie, they wouldn't deceive us. And to do that, we would need to use logic. And that's why he takes authority and puts it from its own category under deductive reasoning. And somehow, so then how do you logically prove that someone wouldn't lie? I think it's this statement. That's my theory. And I'm not super clear on it. But if I was to try to figure out why did he take authority and make it an indirect perception or a deductive perception, I think it's because you have to use logic to prove them as authority. And the answer lies in this quote. That's my theory. A person who is all knowing, they know what to take up and they know what to give up. Um, this is an aspect of a Buddha. They understand, what things that cause pain and what things that cause happiness. And we know that they are unerring, they're perfect, because they've described the first Arya truth perfectly. They've perfectly described suffering. And in the Buddhist text, they say, and the Buddha is the only one that's done that. They're the only person that really describes suffering, the first Arya truth perfectly, that everything is suffering. And so because they describe suffering so uniquely perfectly, then they must be trustworthy and they must be someone who wouldn't lie. And so they must be someone we can take as authority. And they must be someone that we can therefore determine the karmic correlations because they understand what to take up and what to give up. And so we can prove they're a person of valid perception. So because they described suffering so perfectly, so uniquely, then we can prove that there's somebody that wouldn't lie and that they know what to give up and what to take up. And they're a person of valid, who is a source of valid perception. So everything hinges on this idea that a Buddha is unerring. We can tell a Buddha is unerring because they've described suffering perfectly, unlike anyone else. I think that's a garbage. I think that's so terrible. Like every poet has described suffering. You know, how many poets have in their poetry described the state of suffering? Ishvara Krishna in the yoga text, the very first words that he says is there's a problem. And the problem is that we suffer. And we suffer in three different ways. And yoga is the means of transcending that suffering. So what are we supposed to think? Like, if all this proof is based on that someone describes suffering, then they must be a Buddha. Well, what does that mean about a poet that describes suffering? Or Ishvara Krishna in the Sankhya Karikas? I don't know. Maybe it means they're a Buddha. Or maybe this proof falls apart. Or maybe I just don't understand it. All right, last slide. Interpreting the Buddha. We are going to do questions in a second, which is really scary because this class is just so filled with hard questions. How to interpret a Buddha? Buddha says, kill your mom, kill your dad. And then the student's like, what? How do we know when to take the Buddha seriously? We have three ground rules. We have to think about what they mean. Do they have something else in mind? Like when they say to somebody washing the dishes, make sure you break that cup. Are they just being sarcastic and saying, please be careful? Do they want you to break the cup or do they want you to be careful? Do they have something else in mind? Contradiction. Does the statement contradict what we know to be true? Make sure you break that cup. Well, we know they don't want us to do that. Contradicts what they've said. Contradicts just convention. It contradicts logic. So then the third is there need some purpose for them to say something not technically true? Okay. That gives us 20 minutes for questions. Could be from this class, could be from any of the previous classes, could be from some of the debates going on in Telegram. If questions get too hard, we will go to a breakout room as a backup plan. If you go down to the bottom of your screen where it says more with the circle with three dots in it, if you click on that, you'll see something that says interpretation. If you go into that, and if you're English speaking and put English, you will be able to hear people interpret. Okay. Who has an easy question? Nobody. Great. Let's do breakout room.
We have one question in the chat.
Great.
Christina, could you say it aloud, please?
Yes, I can in Russian, okay? У меня вопрос про ментальную картинку, архетип в нашем уме. Та ментальная картинка, которая появляется, когда наша мама впервые показывает нам на машину. Это ментальная картинка, архетип неизменяемая. Но эта ментальная картинка, архетип имеет прямое отношение к изменяемым машинам, которые я вижу в реальном мире. Вот в чем мой вопрос. Каким образом неизменяемая картинка архетип превращается в реальную машину у меня на парковке? То есть, как это возможно, чтобы неизменяемая картинка архетип каким-то образом взаимодействовала и превращалась в изменяющуюся вещь в моем реальном мире?
Yeah. So how can we have a mental image, which is apparently unchanging, and then see things as changing? I think we just have to say we have mental images of changing things. Maybe it's just as simple as that. It sounds like, there's just a lack of acceptance of that. And that's okay. But I think you have a mental image of a changing thing. And that mental image is unchanging itself. And you're having a mental image of a changing thing. And that's what a changing thing is.
Я могу задать дополнительный вопрос, уточняющий?
You should.
Правильно ли я понимаю, что это связано не столько с самой неизменяющейся ментальной картинкой, сколько с нашим восприятием этой ментальной картинки изменяющимся умом? То есть не столько с неизменяющимся объектом, сколько с держателем этого объекта, нашим изменяющимся умом и с процессом этого восприятия.
Eka, can you give it to me again? I didn't catch all of it.
Правильно ли я понимаю, что это связано не столько с неизменяющимся объектом, ментальной картинкой, сколько это связано с тем, что мы воспринимаем неизменяющуюся картинку изменяющимся умом. Объект неизменяющийся, держатель объекта, наш ум изменяющийся. И вот этот процесс восприятия, который есть между объектом и держателем объекта, что это связано, вот изменяющийся, связано с изменяющийся этого, связано с этим.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so. I think the object is changing. And that's a classical division of reality into changing and unchanging. So we're going to have to stick with that paradigm. There's changing things and there's unchanging things. And you might have to work backwards to figure out, as you're doing, how does a changing thing exist? But it's not about the interaction. The thing is changing. The cup is, it's, subtle impermanence is a huge, apparently a huge step to understand on our journey to see emptiness directly. All scripture talks about changing things and unchanging things, and that doesn't change. So we're going to have to find a way to make our understanding fit the paradigm of there's changing things and unchanging things. And to start with that, and then try to have our understanding fit that paradigm. I mean, it's a great process to try to disprove changing things. I've had many debates with Ben about that. Just kind of what you said. Well, maybe there aren't any changing things. If it's all just unchanging mental images, then there aren't changing things. And that's what I think is so valuable about going to a debate ground and having that. I know that's a wrong idea, but forcing someone to prove to me the right idea. And so we can work at that, but it's pervasive in scripture that there's changing things and unchanging things. And it's not just because of, some sort of interaction with it, or because of the mind, because it can't just be the mind, because we have the same problem with the mind. All right. Next question from the chat. How to enjoy meditation? I don't feel like doing it. Mm, I think that that's something that, everybody probably has to come up against, at some point. I don't feel like meditating. I don't enjoy it. So there's a lot of answers to that. One, we might just need to take a break and stop for a little bit. Two, and for a little bit, not quit forever. It might just be that we need to take a break and just for 2 weeks, you know, not meditate, give ourselves a break, come back to it with a fresh state of mind. Might be we just need to find a different object. Like I've been meditating on Tonglen for 3 months. I'm just burnt out from that object. I'm not excited by it anymore. And so it could just be finding a new object. It could be, and I think for a lot of people, it's a lack of being successful. Like I'm just not improving. I've been doing this for years and I'm not getting any better. And I think we don't enjoy doing things we don't feel like we're good at. Who wants to? It's like meditating, I'm not good at it. And I try to do it every day. To try to do something every day that you feel like you're not good at is hard and it perpetuates not liking it. So, one answer I think is we need to be successful at it. We need to see some improvement. And I think that is finding a teacher that can guide us in meditation and that can guide us in the steps of improving our meditation so that we do feel like we're improving. And then we do feel like there's some progress and we do feel like, oh, this is cool. I want to do it. Um, Another answer is like, okay, why I'm just being clear on our motivation. Why do I want to meditate? If it is related to some big goals in life, like getting out of suffering, then being clear on that goal and the connection between the action and the goal, can help us increase our motivation. Those are some ideas. I think, developing the habit, getting good at it, and then feeling the results of meditation. Um, that's a that's a hard answer, but I think it's probably the best one. When we meditate deeply and the body feels good and the mind feels good, it's a lot easier to, like, I enjoy that now. Now it's something I have the habit, and the body and the mind, it's putting the body and the mind into a state that just feels good. And to do that, we have to understand how to get better at meditation. It's a bit problematic. Like, Because to get better at meditation, we have to do it. So we do things that we enjoy. So if we don't enjoy it, we don't do it, we don't get better at it. Mm, Another idea is to meditate and to end the meditation at a place where we feel good about it. So if we meditate for 30 minutes, I have to meditate for 30 minutes. And the last 10 minutes is like, this sucks. I'm fighting my mind. I don't like this. And we're meditating. It might be that we're meditating too long. One of my meditation teachers like, end your meditation in a good place. So that you're like, that was good. And then we have a habit of, or a mindset of, I want to do that again tomorrow. That was something that was good and enjoyable. I want to do that again tomorrow. If we are meditating too long in the last bit of that meditation, it's like we're fighting the mind, and you can try to meditate a bit less. See how that helps. Again, that's hard. That's a hard instruction. Irina has her hand up.
Всем привет. На разборе урока у нас возник такой вопрос с моей кармической группой. Если есть просветленное существо, которое ведет меня по моему пути, и оно воспринимает все времена, мне это сложно сейчас понять, потому что я воспринимаю время линейно, но оно воспринимает меня в каком-то моем воплощении теперешнем страдающей. Значит ли это, что когда я достигну просветления, то где-то все равно будет моя страдающая версия?
Yeah, that's a yeah. So the question is, how does a Buddha perceive suffering, really? Right? Like if I become enlightened, and then do I see myself suffering, a previous version of myself suffering? If I say yes to that, then I will be asked, isn't that a valid perception? And I would have to say yes. And then, doesn't the object of that valid perception exist? And I would have to say yes. And then I would be asked, isn't that a result of bad karma? And I would have to say yes. So I'm not falling for that trap, right? But then can't a Buddha see all three times? I would have to also say yes to that. So it's a problem. I think it's the hardest dilemma for me in Buddhist philosophy. And my answer is called the dirty Buddha theory, which is what we called it on the debate ground at Diamond Mountain. The dirty Buddha theory, meaning we don't have the purity, we don't have enough goodness to really be able to perceive a pure Buddha. Like, we can't get over that problem of how does a Buddha perceive suffering? because we don't have the seeds to be able to imagine a Buddha in the way that would answer that dilemma. That's one answer. That's the one I kind of like. It's still a little problematic, but I like it. Geshe Michael usually says, they do, but they're not perceiving that as suffering. And I think it's related to being able to see all three times. Like maybe if you saw your child scared in a dream, chased by monsters, you know that's just a dream and it's not real. And that they're going to wake up. It's okay. You can see the future of them waking up. So it's not really a bad seed, or it's not really a bad seed to see them suffering that way. I think you could follow that line of thinking and see if you accept it. I think it's a very hard question. It's 9:30. Thankfully, the end of class. But if you have more questions, you could put them in the Telegram chat. You have more debates. I always feel like there should be more questions at the end of class than the start of class. Like that's a really good class for me. Is there like more things that I don't understand? There are more questions. That's awesome. That's progress, or a step towards progress. Okay. Thank you, translators. Thank you, Sarah, for making slides. Thank you, host Karina. And thank you all for being here. We will do class 8 next. So we're coming up to the end. Don't slow down. You know, don't be one of the 30 people that aren't here. A couple more classes. See it through. There's strength in doing it live, not doing it recording. You have to catch up. Do it with somebody. Consider that we're in ACI 16. The evolution of this is that we should be thinking about how we would see ourselves as a teacher and how we would teach. And if we are so inclined, then to find a way to transmit the authentic, traditional knowledge of the 5 books in a way that is understandable, culturally appropriate, and hopefully to some degree I've managed to do that today. And we can take that information and use it to be a little more compassionate, a little more kind. As it's said in that quote, the one who has turned correct, the one who wants to benefit all beings. If our logic doesn't lead us to that place of wanting to benefit all beings, then our logic is useless. It's just ego. Okay. Thanks, my friends. See you all soon.
Thank you, Earle. See you on Tuesday. Thank you, Eka. Thank you, Roxana. Thank you, the tech team. Thank you, everyone, for joining. See you on Tuesday.
Всем спасибо.
Тина, мне надо маму в чат подключить, потому что это она с тобой общается. Я не знаю, о чем.
Да, я тут это пытаюсь. Сейчас уже будешь закрывать. Ладно, я спрошу у нее.
Я сейчас
Спасибо.
ей напишу, чтобы она написала, или в чат ее добавлю. Пока. Спасибо за классные вопросы. Пока. Пока, дорогие.